let's second review a few things about inverse functions. So first, to have an inverse function, a function must be 1 to 1. Remember, if a horizontal line intersections the graph of a function in more than one place, it is not 1 to 1. Second one, if you have points on a function graph and between x and y places will have points on the inverse function graph. The third one, functions and their inverses undo each other, so f of f raised to negative 1 equals x, and since x and y take place, the domain of the function is the range of the inverse, and the range of the function is the domain of the inverse. Lastly, the graph of a function and its inverse are reflections of a given y equals x, a 45 degrees line. I have here a question. So, is y equals sine x a 1-to-1 function? So, the answer is no. A horizontal line intersects its graph many times. So, if we want to find an inverse sine function, we have to have this sine repeat itself. So, we are only going to look at part of the sine graph. If you only look at part of the sine graph, where the x values go from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, and the y values go from negative 1 to 1, we could find an inverse function. Next, we are going to define the inverse function of sine, then to be y equals sine raised to negative 1x. Remember, for inverse functions, x and y trade places, so let's take the values we got for sine x and we'll trade them places for y equals to sine raised to negative 1x with our restricted domain. For our x, so we have here negative pi over 2, negative pi over 6, 0, pi over 6, and lastly pi over 2. And then sa y equals to sine x naman, so we have negative 1, negative 1 half, 0, 1 half, and 1. So remember, we are only looking at x values from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, so that we can have a 1-to-1 function that will have an inverse. We move on to the x and y trade places. So just like the unang table, so we have here x, so yung x naman natin dito is nabago na. So we have negative 1, negative 1 half, 0, 1 half, and 1. Sa kabila naman yung y equals to sine raised to negative 1x. So nagkapalitan lang pala sila, kaya diba sinasabi natin inverse. So we have negative pi over 2, negative pi over 6, 0, pi over 6, and lastly pi over 2. So yun po yung tinatawag natin inverse. So let's graph out of this. So here is a graph of sine x between negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So now notice they are reflections about a 45 degrees line. So here is the graph of here is the graph of sine raised to negative 1x from negative 1 to 1. Since sine x and sine raised to negative 1x are inverse function, they undo each other. So we have here an example po. Looking at the unit circle, if we choose from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, it would be the right half of the circle. Notice the y values, sine values never repeat themselves in this half of the circle, so the sine function would be 1-to-1 here. So when you see inverse sine, then it means give you the sine value, and it's asking which angle on the right half of the unit circle has this sine value. So this is asking where on the right half of the unit circle is the sign value negative 1 half. Well, it looks like the answer should be 11 pi over 6, but remember the range or what you get out must be an angle between negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So we'd use a conterminal angle in this range, which is sine raised to negative 1, negative 1 half equals to negative pi over 6. Okay, let's look at the unit circles to answer this. So yung answer ay ng sine raised to negative 1 squared of 2 over 2 ay pi over 4. This is asking what angle from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2 has a sine value of negative squared of 3 over 2. So the answer is negative pi over 3.
Hi everyone, this is Jeffrey Castillo and I'm going to continue the report of group 5. So let's think about an inverse cosine function. If we chose the right half of the unit circle for cosine values, would we have a one-to-one function? The answer is no. For example, we have cos pi over 3 is equals to cos to the absolute value of negative pi over 3 is equals to 1 half. We have here our circle of data. So let's look at the graph of y is equals to cosine x and see where it is one-to-one. Okay, I'm going to have here the figure, which we can see that it is down to the pi. So from 0 to pi. And also for the circle, we have the 0 to pi, as you can see in the red one. So cos negative 1, cosine negative 1 x is the inverse function of cosine x, but the domain is between negative 1 to 1, and the range is from 0 to pi. We can see that f negative 1 f of x is equals to cosine negative 1 cosine x equals to x, where 0 is less than greater than x less than greater than pi. So f negative 1 x is equals to cosine negative 1 x is equals to x, where negative 1 is greater than less than x less than greater than 1. And for cos negative 1 half is equals to, so this is asking where on the upper half of the unit circle does the cosine value equal 1 half. So we're going to look at the unit circle to see what is the value of 1 half, and we have pi over 3. And when we look for cos negative 1, with the absolute value of square root of 3 over 2, we will have an answer that is pi over 6. Tan negative 1x is the inverse function of tan x, but we must have restrictions to have an x one-to-one function. So we'll take tan x from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So we're going to have this kind of, so we have our negative f negative 1, and we have f of x is equals to tan negative 1, tan x is equals to x, where negative pi over 2 is less than x less than pi over 2. So we have f of f negative 1x is equals to tan of tan negative 1x is equals to x, where negative infinite is less than greater than x less than greater than infinite. So we can see that in our figure here. So for the definition, the inverse sine function for negative 1 is less than greater than x or less than greater than 1. Y is equal to sine negative 1x, provided that sine y is equal to x and negative pi over 2. And we have pi over 2 is less than y and less than greater than pi over 2. As an easy. So we have another notation for inverse sine is arc sine x, which is read as arc sine of x. So we have definition, the inverse cosine function for negative 1 is less than greater than x less than greater than 1. So we have a y is equals to cosine negative 1 and cosine negative 1 x, provided that cos y is equals to x and 0 is less than greater than y less than greater than pi. So another notation for inverse cosine is arcus, which is read as arc cosine of x. So we have the definition, another definition, the inverse tangent function for any real number x, y is equals to tan negative 1 x, provided that we have tan y equals to x and negative pi over 2 is less than y less than pi over 2. Another notation.
So now we're going to talk about the inverse functions of sine, cosine, and tangent. And so that we must restrict the range, so we have a one-to-one function. Here is the summary. Sine raised to negative 1 x. So the restricted two angles on the right half of the unit circle listed from pi over 2 to pi over 2. Cosine raised to negative 1x restricted to angles on upper half of unit circle listed from 0 to pi. Tangent raised to negative 1x restricted to angles on the right half of a unit circle listed from pi over 2 to pi over 2. So as you can see, the sine and the tangent are the same of restricted angles, while the cosine is the restricted angles of the cosine is on the upper half of the unit circle. So now let's talk about the inverses of the reciprocal trigonometric function. The cosecant, secant, have restriction as the reciprocal function, but the cotangent does not. Cosecant exclude 0 since it would be the undefined there, and secant exclude pi over 2. So now let's proceed to the example. So if you need the exact value of the reciprocal function, you can find the flip over of the value you have and find the inverse of the reciprocal function, being careful that you meet the restriction. So secant raised to negative 1 multiplied by the quantity of negative 2 equals cosine raised to negative 1 quantity of negative 1 half equals to. So first we should have to find the reciprocal function over the value of the given. So this is asking what is the angle on the upper half of the unit circle if the cosine value of negative 1 half, or in the other word, cosine theta equals to negative 1 half. So what is the x? So as you can see on our circle unit 1 half, then the reciprocal function is the 2 pi over 3. So as you can see, this is the function gallery of inverse trigonometric function. That's all. Thank you.